And number 5, an electoral body that wears the label independent but is practically under the control of the presidency. These factors have directly and indirectly contributed to the current economic crisis, political instability, and the security situation. We managed to trudge on in this condition, advancing with great difficulty until we got to our own fair heavens. We arrived at our fair heavens when, for the first time in the history of our nation, a person from the South, the region was hit by the fundamental flaws in our polity, became president. One would have expected that, being from the Niger Delta, and an academic for that matter, President Jonathan will understand the role carved out for him, lay aside transient political ambitions, and champion the cause of restructuring while pursuing national integration, and then go down in history as Nigeria's greatest leader hitherto. But this is yet to be seen. However, President Goodluck Jonathan came close to living up to this when he convoked the 2014 National Conference, a gathering of nobles, elders, and the young from across the nation, in which these issues were critically examined and recommendations made. Fellow Nigerians, I speak expressly to you that the report of the 2014 National Conference is a fair havens in which Nigeria must winter to avoid the storms that are ahead. Just the way Paul on the Alexandrian ship perceived that the voyage will end in much loss and warned the centurion, helmsman, and ship owner, I warned the nation through a broadcast and press conference held at the Lateran Assembly on Sunday, July 22nd, 2012. I told the nation that I perceive that there will be no 2015 if we fail to fix 2014. Indeed, those perceptions were signals I was speaking at the time, but there are practical pointers in that direction today, even if faintly perceptible to the discerning. Between 2012 and now, the signs have become more visible, though stakeholders still refuse to pay attention. Like Paul, our counsel has become unpopular. And as it was in the Alexandrian ship, the majority has asked that the ship of state set sail towards the general elections rather than winter in fundamental reforms such as those proposed in the 2014 National Conference. And the reason is obvious. Just like Fair Havens was an inconvenient place for the Alexandrian ship to winter in, change or reformation is a difficult process and is often not suitable to the comfort zone mentality that prefers to do the same thing over and over again and hope for a different result, a mentality which, according to Albert Einstein, is the very definition of insanity. Now, weather forecast. Ominous shadows and gathering storm. In Acts of the Apostles, chapter 27, verses 9 and 10. Acts 27, 9 and 10. When much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Men, I perceive that this voyage," you can put there, this election, 2015, "I perceive this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only for the cargo and ship, but also our lives." Paul warned there that the voyage will end in disaster, but the centurion, the commander of the army that was charged to take Paul to Rome, was persuaded more by the opinion of the experts, in quote, the helmsman and owner of the ship, than by what Paul was saying. One will want to ask, were there no visible signs of the impending storm? Was it just Paul's spiritual perception that was at work? we will find that the journey all the way to fair havens from the coast of Asia, beginning from the ship of Adramyttium, was laden with difficulty because of contrary winds that caused difficulty in navigation and obstructed procession. Likewise in our nation, despite the warnings, Mr. President is more persuaded by the assurance given him by the experts and by what others will say if he does not proceed, including the managers of the economy, the organizers of the elections, the heads of the armed forces and security agencies, as well as the expectations of the majority, than by a lone voice charging him to come for a while in order to fix the fundamentals. However, the same question applies in the case of our nation. Is it just my perception and those of others in the minority today that have prompted this warning of an impending storm? Are the signs not visible? What is the weather forecast saying? Weather forecasting entails the gathering of quantitative data and the application of an understanding of atmospheric behavior to predict the changes in weather. Jesus, our Lord, made reference to this practice in Matthew chapter 16, verse 1 to 3. Matthew 16, 1 to 3. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came and testing him asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather. Today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. When I first alerted the nation that there will be no 2015 if the fundamentals were not addressed in the year 2012, I was asked if I was given a prophecy in the order of thus saith the Lord. Even now, many are asking the same question. At that time, like Paul, I told you that I'd perceived it, but I would want to ask, are the signs not there? If you can predict the weather, would it not be hypocritical to feign ignorance regarding the foreboding state of the nation? Can we not see the wind, the clouds gathering ahead of a major storm? Hear my warning today. There is too much turbulence ahead. A competent helmsman knows not to sail in such a situation. Instead of ignoring the weather forecast, only to subsequently shipwreck, kill himself, the crew, the passengers, as well as destroy the ship and the cargo. I will briefly highlight certain crucial developments that we may be disregarding as we sail into the general elections, but I must first point out that the purpose for highlighting these red flags is to challenge decision makers and political stakeholders, as well as security, military, and intelligence agencies, to take the steps necessary to avert crises before elections, during elections, and after elections, whenever they hold. I must also warn that if we sail into general elections at this time without fixing the fundamentals, no matter what precaution is taken by the helmsman and the owner of the ship, once the ship sets sail from fair havens, an encounter with Euroclydon will be inevitable. Against this backdrop, I present the signs of the gathering storms. Sign number 1. Poor level of election preparedness. That's sign number 1. Reasonable people are inclined to ask how prepared the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is for the upcoming general elections. Despite the desperate efforts of the Commission to manage pre-election logistics, the tales of woe that have trailed the permanent voters' card collection exercise have raised a lot of questions as to the level of preparedness of the Commission, with many Nigerians feeling disenfranchisement. The Vanguard of November 15, 2014, in an article titled Permanent Voters Cards, PVC, How INEC Failed Nigerians, it was reported that more than 75% of the PVCs in rural areas in Lagos were left uncollected. Similar and even worse tales of woe trailed the exercise in other states, such as in Edo State, where the PVCs were stolen. The Nigerian pilot of November 17, 2014, reported a collection rate of less than 50% in Abia State. A survey conducted by News Agency of Nigeria on public perception regarding INEC's preparedness for the elections, including the organization's handling of voter registration and card collection exercises, and the adoption of recommendations to forestall the challenges of the 2011 elections, gave INEC a low scorecard. Similarly, acts of lawlessness on the part of political parties and seeming partisanship on the part of security agencies have raised questions as to the readiness of the stakeholders to conduct or to allow the conduct of a free, fair, and credible elections. How else can one explain the fact that in violation of Section 99 subsection 1 of the Electoral Act 2010 as amended, political campaigns commenced long before the opening of the window? How else can one explain the invasion of the Secretariat of the APC by the Department of State Security? Either a political party was devising unlawful schemes, in which case culprits ought to be prosecuted and details exposed, or the DSS was acting out a script written to repress opposition parties. Whichever may have been the case, it questioned the readiness of stakeholders to operate by the rules. Sign number 2, safety and security risks. A study on Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria in the period between 2006 and 2013 by Chatham House in the United Kingdom revealed that 17 states in the north were terror-prone and recorded varying degrees of violent attacks leading to violent deaths. In terms of frequency of attacks, Borno, Yobe, Kano, Kaduna, Adamawa, and Bauchi, in that order, led the other states. Further compilation of recorded incidents from other sources showed that towards mid-2014, Boko Haram attacks had become an almost daily occurrence in Borno State. Terror attacks or threats of same was also reported in northern states that had been previously free of such, including Kogi, Nasarawa, as well as in southern states such as Lagos, Delta, and Imo. Given the new tactics being adopted by the Boko Haram sect, especially suicide bombing by teenage girls, who it appears the sect is increasingly targeting for abduction, the risk factor in massive political rallies and in polling units across the north of the country, and to a lesser extent in the south, is dangerously high. Let us not forget that in December 2014, a female suicide bomber arrested by vigilante forces in Borno State revealed that 50 other female suicide bombers had been let loose. As INEC had requested of the federal government a massive deployment of armed forces and security agents for the general elections, a proposal that is being opposed by opposing parties, I challenge the federal government to conduct an honest assessment of the capability and numerical strength of each of the security agencies and armed forces, and assure Nigerians that the ratio of forces to polling units across the Federation is such that can effectively ward off potential attacks and guarantee security. The logic would be to deploy more forces to areas that are highly prone to terror, but security tacticians must not forget that deceit is a weapon of war. Terrorists might seek to take the nation by surprise and target less protected areas which ordinarily might have been less terror-prone. Let the security agents also be mindful of what I will refer to as the Ziklag factor. If you want to know it, it's an opportunity for you to study 1 Samuel chapter 30. When you leave your base unprotected, it will be totally destroyed by invading terrorists. If security agencies are to be massively deployed to polling units on election day, it will be risky to leave the home front unprotected in terror-prone areas, as terror attacks might be unleashed on homes to target the non-voting population. Worse still, with their antecedents of becoming partisan and getting caught up in politicking during elections, can our security agents maintain the level of alertness required to quell potential attacks? We might have succeeded in organizing some gubernatorial elections in the South, and the aborted gubernatorial election in Adamawa, due to the subsequent swearing in of the deputy governor by massively deploying militaries and civil defense forces. However, we cannot ignore these threats ahead of the general elections. Sign number 3, the likely minority king-making. Likely minority king-making. Nigeria has a history of lower voter turnout. For instance, the 2011 parliamentary elections recorded 25.8% turnout, while the presidential elections recorded 48.32%. In essence, electoral decisions in Nigeria are made by the minority. Given the state of the nation, in spite of the excitement trailing the emergence of candidates, the 2015 elections threatened to record an even worse turnout. Aside the problems associated with voter registration and PVC collection, if the reported hundreds of thousands of displaced persons in terror-prone areas are considered with respect to their status as part and parcel of the electorate, and if terror-stricken towns are considered in terms of polling units involved, then we are faced with the likelihood of massive disenfranchisement and voter apathy that could render the elections disputable and inconclusive. Sign number 4, looming constitutional and legal crisis. The constitutional provisions for election into the office of the president, as articulated in section 132 of the 1999 Constitution, provides a window for challenging the validity of any presidential election if elections cannot be held in some parts of the country, as might be the case if the security situation is not addressed before the elections. Section 132, subsection 4 provides, and I quote, "For the purpose of an election to the office of the president, the whole of the federation shall be regarded as one constituency." Section 47 of the Electoral Act 2010 provides that voting in any particular election under this act shall take place on the same day and time throughout the federation. By these provisions, it is clear that any presidential election that excludes certain parts of the nation will result in constitutional crisis and legal battles that may further heighten sectional tensions. Sign number 5, impending post-election tension. This necessitates a look at those pointers to possible post-election tension. First, like the gathering of the clouds, the utterances of vested interests from the northern and southern sections of the country as to how they will react if the election turns one way or the other is a pointer to an impending storm that the nation must not ignore. In recent times, direct threats in this regard have been coming from vested interests in the South-South with a history of militancy. This should give the nation a grave cause for concern when considered against the massive oil theft in the region, as well as reports suggesting arms build with ex-militants allegedly linked to a bought South African arms deal that was widely reported, and the purchase of 6 warships as reported in the Punch newspaper of December 13, 2014. Mind you, the Global Terrorism Index reported and identified 6 terror groups in Nigeria. Contrary to public perception, according to the report, even though Boko Haram is currently the deadliest terror group in the country and has laid claim to about 90% of the terror attacks in the period covered by the report, the largest terror group in Nigeria is the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, with a membership strength of about 15,000, despite its having recorded much fewer attacks than Boko Haram. That is the report I read. Ladies and gentlemen, one does not need a soothsayer to know this is a red flag. On the other hand, the readiness of the multitude of northern youth to violently defend what they perceive as theirs, rightly or wrongly, is well documented in our recent election experience. The nation will not want to be caught up in violence involving 2 regions. Another civil war in addition to terrorism will be too much weight on an ailing nation. Why not first address the root causes of these tensions that mount up every election year, root causes that elections themselves cannot resolve but aggravate? Sign number 6, looming economic collapse. Alongside these pointers to political upheaval are the signs of an impending economic collapse. Any of the following scenarios is possible. Number 1, inflation. With the proposed diversification of revenue based from oil to taxation, and with the devaluation of the naira in an economy that is largely import dependent, cost-push inflation is likely to occur. Also, the flow of money into the economy through politics within the first quarter of the year ahead of the elections could as well facilitate a demand pull inflation. The so-called average Nigerian who has no place on the dinner table will be at the brunt. It is even doubtful that they can access the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Deflation, number 2. With the expected reduction in government spending for a nation whose financial sector is still largely government supported, and with likely reduction in purchasing power due to taxation and possible job cuts in the public as well as private sector, a fall in aggregate demand will eventually lead to deflation. An inflation-deflation transition could result in losses for investors in volatile markets such as securities and property. Number 3, monetary collapse. The depletion of our foreign reserves, the dip in crude oil prices, and its downward impact on our foreign earnings, the weak state of our manufacturing sector, and our import dependence could lead to a sustained downward spiral in the value of our currency. We are therefore faced with the challenge of managing a volatile transition process and a looming economic downturn at the same time. It will interest you to note that the same fundamentals that must be addressed in the political dimension of our challenges also hold the key to economic stability and prosperity for our beloved nation. However, before we take a look at these fundamentals, it is necessary to point out one more sign of the gathering storms that has to do with my constituency, the church, and its interactions with the political space in 2015. Sign number 7. Potential religious confusion, betrayals, scandals, and persecution. In 2011, when I was elected by General Buhari as running mate, there was a gump up against that ticket by a substantial section of the church which preferred the candidate that was perceived as a Christian, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan. Not only was the church not convinced about General Buhari's non-fundamentalist stance, it also refused to give support to the running mate, who in perception is controversial and nonconformist. At that time, the mantra amongst many men of God was that a pastor had nothing to do with politics. Reports also have it that Christian clergy received financial inducement. One of them reported it to me. If I'm put on the spot, I will mention names. Reports also have it that Christian clergy received financial inducement from their preferred candidate, who is again contesting against the same General Buhari in 2015. To compound the matter, General Buhari's running mate is another pastor who should ordinarily have the support of his own church, a very influential denomination in and outside of the country, and whose head is highly respected in the Christian establishment. Therefore, ordinarily, for those to whom religion means a lot in the making of electoral decisions, the current running mate of the APC should be Tiwantiwa, that is, our own, and should be massively supported by the church. But it's not going to be that easy. What will be the implication of turning away from the incumbent, who was massively supported in 2011 by the church establishment? How about those to whom the president has done one favor or another, such as waivers, contracts, soft landings, protection of vested interests, licenses, in one form or another, or even outright monetary gifts, not necessarily bribery, but a harmless gift? Will these pastors, priests, and prophets now turn against their benefactor, the president, to give support to our own? What will be the position of the Christian Association of Nigeria, CAN, and the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria, organizations that have been massively behind the president and who are likely biased against APC, as PFN's 2015 round-the-clock circulated prayer bulletin reveals? Would there be reminders that this same incumbent has knelt before us at our conventions, where we laid hands on him and supposedly endorsed him? Or will we make a U-turn now that this is our own? Will such a U-turn not come with dire consequences, reminiscent of the Abimelech experience with the men of Shechem in Judges chapter 9, verses 22 to 24. Judges 9, 22 to 24. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled and their blood be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, those who supported, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. Let us not forget that the men of Shechem paid dearly for it, with their lives intact. Do we see persecution looming for the church? A section of the church had started saying, from good luck to bad luck. I wonder what the other section of the church will say in the days to come. Do we see persecution looming? Do we see high-profile scandals? Imagine if the church makes a U-turn. Or will the church simply deny or betray its own by the deniers that are going on now that we have not endorsed anyone? Will the church, like the ostrich deprived of wisdom, treat its young harshly and choose to support incumbency in order to stay safe and protect waivers, interests, and investments? You said private jets, I didn't say so. Would the question of support and endorsement pitch major religious leaders against one another, with brothers fighting against brother, whether in secret or in the open? See what the book of Job says about the ostrich church, the mega church that lacks wisdom. Job 39 from verse 13 to 18. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but are wings and pinions like the kindly storks. For she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain, without concern. Why? Because God deprived her of wisdom and did not endow her with understanding. When she leaves herself on high, she scorns the rod and its rider and says, I can fly too. Challenging as all this may be, our confidence is in the fact that no matter the degree of betrayers and shaking that will occur, it will only produce a glorious church without spots or wrinkle. For Jesus, the true head of the church, had said, he will build this church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Having said that, let us look at the options available to our nation. That is the alternative of setting sail in spite of the imminent storms of a political, economic, military, and religious nature, the stirrings of the four winds of the earth upon our nation. I want to give us our own propositional alternative. What I've said in the past to our nation and our leaders, I will repeat here once more. To avoid the gathering storms, the following steps should be taken. Number one, activate the constitutional provisions for the suspension of elections. Section 135, subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution provides as follows. If the Federation is at war, in which the territory of Nigeria is physically involved, and the President considers that it's not practicable to hold elections, the National Assembly may, by resolution, extend the period of 4 years mentioned in the subsection of this section, in subsection 2 of this section, from time to time, but no such extension shall exceed a period of 6 months at any one time. The argument against this will be the notion that the country is not at war. If indeed the country is not at war, how can then one explain the invasion and the annexation of Nigerian territory by insurgents launching attacks from our borders and neighboring countries? Let us not forget that on May 14, 2013, while declaring a state of emergency in 3 states, President Goodluck Jonathan said of the activities of these terrorists, and I quote, Mr. President, these actions amount to a declaration of war and a deliberate attempt to undermine the authority of the Nigerian state and threaten its territorial integrity. As a responsible government, we will not tolerate this. End of quote. Records indicate that since that declaration in 2013, the situation has only worsened. Therefore, if the country was at war then, according to Mr. President, it is even more so now. However, I do recognize the fact that opinions are divided on whether or not the Boko Haram plague can be described as war or just as an act of insurgency. Truth be told, this is mere semantics. As Aesop said, the injury we do and the one we suffer are not weighed in the same scales. Depending on which side of the divide one belongs, the difference between war and insurgency can be likened to the difference between terrorists and freedom fighters. One man's meat is another man's poison, just as one man's music is another man's noise. Those that are condemned as terrorists by one group are hailed as freedom fighters by another. Therefore, I submit that if the president considers that a part of the federation will be disenfranchised by reason of the Boko Haram plague, a postponement of the election may not be out of place. In my view, the litmus test to arrive at the type of war contemplated by the Constitution is the practicality of getting people in the affected states to line up to vote for candidates of their choice in situations where they cannot predict when the next attack will be launched by insurgents. I hold the view that the drafters of the law feared for mass disenfranchisement of Nigerians who refuse to risk their lives, hence the requirement that the nation wins the war before conducting an election. With that as it may, there's yet another argument. It goes thus. Since the government has demonstrated a very high degree of incompetence as far as combating terrorism, is it not better to have a replacement, particularly in terms of a new government led by the person of the APC candidate, General Muhammadu Buhari, which can only happen through elections? This reasoning seems valid. Although the president has made several attempts at tackling the issue, his avowed political will has not yielded fruit and the situation has only worsened. It is perhaps too complicated for the government to deal with. But what is the guarantee that there will be free, fair, and credible elections and that the opposition will not be rigged out of victory once again? Here's a guarantee. And what is the guarantee that the power of incumbency will not successfully manipulate the presidential elections? What is the guarantee? Even if General Buhari wins, what will happen if in response to a Buhari victory, another wave of insurgency explodes in the South-South in such proportion that will completely ground the Nigerian economy? Is that what we want as a nation? However, I must state that the proposal for suspension of election is not with a view to giving the president an avenue for undue tenure litigation, but for the purpose of building a coalition that will bring lasting solutions to our problems. Proposition number 2, create a transitional government. In suspending the elections to gain the support of all stakeholders, the president must not act with the intention to seek re-election. Rather, he should, within the period, commit himself to building a non-partisan coalition comprised of major stakeholders and competent statesmen from each geopolitical zone. This coalition, headed by the president, will constitute a combined force that will tackle terrorism and address what I've earlier referred to as the fundamentals within a frame of 2 years or less. I hate to mention, with every seriousness in me, that those in the opposition who are fooling Nigerians that they have the answer to terrorism when they win power are unfair to our people and unfair to families that are suffering, because if they know what to do, why not do it? Why election? Number 3, address the fundamentals. Addressing the fundamentals calls for immediate implementation of the report or part thereof of the 2014 National Conference, especially as it relates to 2 major things among others: restructuring with a view to achieving true federalism under zonal commissions, as well as fiscal federalism, ensuring, as proposed by the report of the National Conference, that adequate allocation is given to a solid minerals development fund in addition to other recommendations geared towards economic diversification. And 2, achieving national reconciliation and integration by adopting, constitutionalizing, and propagating the National Charter for Reconciliation and Integration. Number 4, conduct accurate census. Aside facilitating development planning, an accurate census will lay the foundation for a sound identity management scheme, facilitate effective and efficient local government administration, provide the basis for proper constituency delineation, and enable the conduct of well-organized voter registration exercises. Number 5, establish a truly independent electoral body. A truly independent electoral body whose head will no longer be appointed by the president, and whose funding will be drawn from First Line Church on the Federation account, will guarantee the conduct of free, fair, and credible elections that our neighbors in Ghana now seem to be enjoying. Number 6, create a true people's constitution that will reflect the aforementioned features. A true people's constitution, rather than being preambled by a military decree, as in the case of the 1999 Constitution, will be preceded by the people's express interest to exist as a nation and be governed under agreed principles as espoused in the Charter for National Reconciliation and Integration adopted at the 2014 National Conference. Proposition 7. Conduct free, fair, and credible elections in the consensually accepted constitutional arrangement. In the end, as an integrated rather than regionally and religiously divided nation, we will arrive at the same juncture we are currently, but at that time better prepared with the fundamentals in place and with the nation set for the leadership of the best of the North and the best of the South, while federating units truly federal are constitutionally empowered for collaborative and competitive developments. Having given these 7 propositions, I would like to pinch myself and say, supposing this council is ignored, what's likely to happen? I call this segment Setting Sail in Spite of the Storm Clouds. Despite this timely warning, which includes the way forward to credible elections and to a stable and prosperous nationhood, I'm almost certain that, like the helmsman and owner of the Alexandrian ship in Acts 27, as well as the majority in the ship, the handlers of our nation and other stakeholders in the opposition will prefer to set sail rather than winter at fair havens. From the 13th verse of Acts of the Apostles, chapter 27, we understand that the decision to set sail was fueled by the fact that the southern wind blew softly and gave the illusion of safety. He reads, and I quote, Acts 27:13, when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. I'll come back to this, but note that Crete means carnal or fleshly. That's the meaning of Crete, carnal or fleshly. Ladies and gentlemen, the south wind blew recently when General Muhammadu Buhari, against formidable contestants and money bags, won with a landslide victory, a landslide majority at the APC primary in the heart of Lagos, southwestern Nigeria, and that against all odds. Tell your neighbor, the south wind has blown. Added to that, the relative peace in the south has kept us from seeing the severity of the crisis rocking our nation and its potential to be aggravated by premature electioneering. However, in the 14th verse of Acts 27, we find that not long after, a tempestuous wind called what? Euroclydon arose and hit the sea, and the ship was caught in the midst of it until it could no longer be controlled. That ship drifted until it was wrecked. If you have your New King James Version of the Bible, you can open it if it has a middle column and see the meaning of Euroclydon. Euroclydon is a cyclonic, tempestuous northeast wind. Yes, the south wind has blown softly. It's to trap us into a face-to-face encounter with a northeast wind. It is reminiscent of the wave of terror attacks bedeviling the nation from the northeast, as though reminding us that going by precedent, An incumbency rigged election could cause a volatile electorate in the region to take advantage of the Boko Haram crisis, which has snowballed from the northeast to unleash a storm on the nation from the north, and that likewise a northern victory will only resuscitate a south-south resistance. If you're ready for that, you can throw caution to the wind and set sail. After the storm, Nigeria, the biggest miracle of the century. It is noteworthy that after all was said and done, just as God assured Paul, no life was lost, though the ship was wrecked and property was lost. It is very gratifying that in the end, the majority that was wrong became the minority, and the lone voice minority that was right became the majority. Paul, the prisoner, became the commander with a clear blueprint on how to salvage lives from the avoidable wreckage. And as he instructed the centurion, he had no choice but to comply. Ladies and gentlemen, my heartfelt prayer at this juncture is that our leaders will listen and do the needful to avert an avoidable disaster, so that there will be no need for anyone to say at the end, "We told you so." I find it very useful to repeat the words of Paul here with all humility, trusting God that all men of goodwill, in and outside of government, will hear, heed, and act accordingly. Acts 27, 20 to 26. Acts 27, 20 to 26. Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we will be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me, and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God, that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island.'" Paul further said in Acts 27, 30 to 36. Acts 27, 30 to 36. "And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship," you know how these politicians run away? As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, it's called medical checkup abroad, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless this man stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. None of them will escape. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day. You have waited and continue without food and eating nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of them all, and when he had broken it, he began to eat in the midst of storm. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, gentlemen of the press, let me at this juncture invite and encourage you all, those within the country and those in the diaspora, to join us at the Lateran Assembly as we observe a 14-day solemn assembly, a time of corporate fasting and prayer from Sunday the 1st of February to Saturday the 14th of February 2015, to entreat the God of heaven for the survival of our nation. We shall meet daily for corporate prayers on all 14 days from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Those abroad can join us via live streaming. In closing, let me place on the register my full persuasion regarding the outcome of our present dilemma. I am fully persuaded that no matter how dark it becomes for Nigeria, there's a silver lining beyond the dark clouds. And this nation will overcome the storms and rise to fulfill our destiny. I believe that no matter how unstable the polity may become, we will transit from shame to fame in the name of Jesus. I'm persuaded that no matter the level of economic collapse, the economy of Nigeria will recover. So in preparation for a previous prophecy, let us begin to expect the emergence of the tender plant from the side of the north. I've all prepared before the foundation of the world to steer Nigeria into a prophetic destiny. We are in the season of his emergence. What the mouth of the Lord has spoken, the seal of the Lord will accomplish. I'm further persuaded that our national reconciliation, integration, and full recovery will be a wonder to the world, and that leaders of nations will be the path to our doorstep to understudy God's power at transforming nations. Our authority for this assertion is God's word in Psalm 126, verse 1 to 6. Psalm 126, 1 to 6. When the Lord brought back the captivity of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with singing. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are glad. Bring back our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Therefore, come rain, come shine, by the grace of the living God, Nigeria will be saved, Nigeria will be changed, and Nigeria will become great in my lifetime. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless Nigeria. Happy New Year to you all.